The new Korean drama, Do You Like Brahms? That's based on the real-life love triangle that happened between Clara Schumann and her husband Robert and their friend Johannes Brahms. It really did happen and was in many ways even more romantic than the show, as amazingly romantic as the show is. And so I thought I'd tell you a little bit about the real-life love triangle and how it does relate to the show in many ways, and some of the differences too. Johannes Brahms met Clara and Robert when he was only 20 years old, and they'd been married for 14 years already. But Robert and Clara fell instantly in love with Brahms and his music at first sight. Clara loved his music, loved hearing him play, and was always begging him to write more music. She was really into him. His music spoke to her heart and soul in a very deep and intense way, and it's almost certain that she really was in love with him, even as she was still in love with her husband. Robert, her husband, was also very enamored and in love with Brahms from the very first time he met him. He was in love with his music to the point where he proclaimed him the next Beethoven for all the world and wrote an article about it in a paper calling him that. Clara talks about the first time she met Brahms in her diary and talks about his beautifully expressive face and his beautiful hands. And she also in her diary calls him Robert's Johannes, that her husband already proclaimed him his and was in love with him. We're not really sure, but it's possible that Robert was bisexual and had even deeper feelings for Brahms. Though for certain, Brahms only looked up to Robert as a surrogate father and teacher, and it was truly Clara who he fell madly in love with from the very start. He dedicated his second sonata to her. Clara gave him piano lessons and helped him write third sonata. It's true that Brahms moved in with the Schumanns, and even as he fell daily in love with Clara, her husband was right there, right next to them, watching every minute. Robert likely knew that Brahms was falling in love with his wife, and I don't think he minded. Clara was the greatest and most famous pianist in Europe at that point in the mid-19th century. She was also a brilliant composer in her own right, and Robert knew that Brahms would be helpless not to fall in love with her too. It was kind of expected. The main way that the Korean drama isn't like the real-life love story is that 5 months after Brahms met the Schumanns, Robert fell really ill and had to be placed in a hospital. Brahms stayed and lived with Clara while she despaired that her husband was never going to recover. He fell more and more deeply in love with her as he stayed with her, and she depended on him for emotional support in her husband's absence. Her number one comfort in those days was asking Brahms for more music and asking him to play for her. She never stopped loving her husband. She always loved him. That she loved both her husband and Brahms is very probable. Brahms knew that she was always in love with her husband, and even after Robert eventually died, Brahms always knew that Clara would love her husband more than she ever loved him. They lived for another 40 years and had a 40-year friendship. I'm going to talk much more about what happened in that relationship and the other women that Brahms tried to fall in love with, but never actually made the commitment to, partly because he was always too in love with Clara to commit to anyone else. The music that's been playing in the background and you see in the video is the Andante from Brahms's third sonata that he wrote when he moved in with the Schumanns, and Clara helped him write it. It was Clara's favorite thing that he wrote, and she played it on her concerts. It was the very first piece of his that was ever performed publicly. And you can hear in the music how much he's falling in love with her and how much he's dying for her to love him back. And can't you just imagine Clara playing the music for him and to him? It's so lovely. In my next episode, I'm going to talk about all the ways Park Jun-young resembles Brahms in personality and looks. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the secrets behind the Traumerei piece and some of the other background things that actually are very similar to the backstory in their second episode. Enjoy the music and let me know in the comments what else you'd like to know about the Brahms-Clara-Robert love triangle. Hit like and subscribe, all that. See you next time.